Good afternoon. The ruling party, the ANC, continues to battle the fallout of a resolution that compels members who have been criminally charged to step aside, and it is causing quite a fallout in the ANC. Meanwhile, there's a whole lot of stuff happening within the party, but to make sense of this all, I'm talking to political analyst Melanie Verwoerd. Good afternoon, Melanie.
Good afternoon.
Melanie, the big question about the ANC is the question whether the ANC will split. What is your opinion about it?
It won't. And there are a number of reasons for it. But the main reason is that who's going to split off? It's not going to be Ramaphosa's faction, because he's the president and they're in power. So if he splits off from the ANC, he's no longer president and his faction is no longer in power. So they're not going to split off. If you talk about the anti-Ramaphosa faction, let's assume it's the ones led by ACE. The reason why they would split off is that they want to get power, right? Because they need power to prevent them from going to jail, to stop the prosecutions against them, etc. They are not going to get power if they split away from the ANC. They will sit in the opposition benches. It's impossible for them to become the governing party. As we know, we've seen many parties breaking away from the ANC. We've seen the EFF, we've seen COPE, we've seen many other parties, and the chance of getting into the majority party is zero. So no, the ANC won't split. People will break away from it. The ANC won't split because both sides want to be in power, and they can't to be that without being in the ANC.
How will it play out according to you?
That's a very, very big question. I mean, so the question, there's a number of questions. The first thing is, of course, will Ace Magashule be forced to stand aside? To step aside? Will he step aside by himself? As I see it, ACE has basically got three options now. The NEC has decided he has to step aside. So he's got three options now. The first one is that he just says, I accept that. I go quietly and I tell my supporters not to do anything. Yeah, I think the chance of that is just about zero, that's going to happen. His other option is, of course, to say that he's going to step aside, to say that he wants his supporters to behave, but quietly behind the scenes, his supporters and so on organize, mobilize, and cause a lot of trouble to sort of show the support and pretend that it is completely spontaneous and so on. I think they're already doing some of that. So that's one of his options. The third option is for him to say, no, I'm not going to step aside. And now you have to discipline me. And then he will appeal, possibly take them to court, etc., and stretch out time. And the reason for doing that is he wants to buy time to get to the ANC's National General Council, which will be somewhere this year. They haven't set yet, or even to the elective conference of next year. And by doing all of this, of course, he can win time. Remember when they asked Jacob Zuma to step aside during the Thabo Mbeki, when Thabo Mbeki asked him during or after the rape trial way back, he did step aside and then went to the NGC, and the branches overturned it, and he had to come back into, or he could come back into the ANC, which of course he did. So I think there's a number of things there. What's very clear to me is what's happening at the moment is that we're seeing the fight. The fight is starting for the next elective conference end of next year. It's the lead up to the next Nasrec, wherever that will be. Those who oppose Cyril Ramaphosa, those who are almost all of them are in trouble with the law. They don't like him, of course, because he's not going to defend them. He's not going to pay for their legal cost or allow the party to do so. And they know that the only way for them to really be safe is to regain power within the ANC. And to do that, they need to win with their candidates next year at the next elective conference. And what we're starting to see, all this noise, all this buildup, is really those guys starting to mobilize. And their mobilization seemed to be fairly focused on the young people, because they know that the sort of older, loyal ANC guys are not really that interested in these guys. They are not supporters. They like Cyril Ramaphosa. They are anti-corruption. They don't like what these guys are doing to the ANC. So they're trying to really direct or get some support from the guys, and therefore their expressions, their policies and so on are increasingly being radicalized, because we know that that younger group of voters, both inside and outside the ANC, are far more radicalized. And that's why you're seeing these kind of things like the radical economic transformation language, the MKVA, the militarization of politics, etc. It's all sort of to appeal to that younger group for them to regain power.
The ANC is broadly divided into the supporters of the radical economic transformation group and then the pro-Ramaphosa group. How strong is that RET group in the ANC?
Well, the thing is, we don't know exactly how big that group is. Of course, again, you can get a lot of support when you talk radical language. That's exactly why they're doing it, particularly amongst a younger group of people, by the younger groups. They definitely are not the majority in the ANC by a long shot, not close to being a majority. But that doesn't mean that they can't cause a lot of problems, and of course they are clearly very noisy, right? They are making a lot of noise. There's no real threat to Ramaphosa in terms of not being the president anymore. That's not happening. I mean, he is secure in his position until the next ANC's elective conference. There's no chance of them getting rid of him in any way, because the only two ways you can get rid of a sitting president is either through a vote of no confidence in Parliament. There is nothing of that happening inside Parliament, or alternatively, you have to get rid of him through an elective conference in the ANC. That elective conference is only scheduled for the end of next year. If they want to do it earlier, they need to get 7 out of the 9 provinces to ask the NEC for an early elective conference, and that's not on the cards at all. So for the moment, it's not dangerous. It's a bigger question what happens end of next year. But for the moment, I think, and you can also see the way the ANC is handling it, they're quite dismissive of it and handling it quite strongly.
Some people were saying all along, whilst President Cyril Ramaphosa has been criticized since he took over at Nasrec, he has been criticized of not acting or being active enough, proactive enough. And now you see a couple of things happening. Is that the result of his way of doing things, not rushing into it?
I think it's definitely part of it. And there is 2 things to it. One is a personality thing, that he is more inclusive, that he's very careful, that he answers. But secondly, he's also very strategic, right? He's he's one of the best political strategists I've ever seen. He also knows he doesn't take on battles until he knows he can win them. And we're seeing that it's paying off. His patience is paying off. But I think there was also a turning point last year during the corruption scandal with the COVID equipment. I think that certainly gave him and his faction a sort of gap in the ANC, gave them some breathing space, because I think it really shocked. One should ask why, but it certainly shocked the NEC of the ANC significantly, and broader the ANC, the amount of anger that was suddenly exposed, and the anger that was directed at the ANC government because of the corruption during the PPE, the protective clothing and equipment scandals. And that suddenly provided an opening for Ramaphosa to move forward very forcefully around the corruption issues. That's when he brought out that open letter to the ANC that got published. You could see by then he had built enough alliances, so it wasn't like he hadn't done anything before that. He'd built enough alliances that he felt quite comfortable to put it out in the public domain, something that has never happened before, very rarely happens, to be very critical of that, and then to push through certain resolutions on the NEC. And I think also things, a lot of politics has to do with timing. And if you want to survive in politics, you need to choose things at the right time, do things at the right time, and know when to push and when to push. And I think when it comes to the corruption issues, that's exactly what he did.
If he manages to do what he's planning, who's coming with him, who's behind him,
I do believe that there are still a significant amount of people that haven't been involved in large-scale corruption or even in petty corruption. So I think he will have a smaller, there were less of them, but certainly the majority of his supporters will still come with him. There will be enough people. It's not like they're going to run out of people. The ANC has a membership of more than 1 million, I think close to 1.5 million at the moment. So there are enough people there. It's not like they're going to run out of it. And I think there are still a significant amount of cabinet ministers, members of parliament, etc., which have not been tied into corruption. I think this is one of the dangers because, also there has been so much, and we've heard obviously so much of it, and particularly with the Zondo Commission recently, that there is the temptation to think that every single person have been involved in corruption. And that's simply just not true, and I think one needs to just sort of be careful with that kind of narrative. So there'll be enough people to follow him.
27 October, the day we go to the polls. What can we expect in the ANC up to that day?
Well, I think first of all, on the day, it's always difficult to predict with local government elections because national polls don't really help you. People vote very differently in local government elections. But what we can see from by-elections, also the ones that were held very recently, is that the ANC seems to be holding. The EFF seems to be holding. Both the EFF and the ANC is holding, maybe even growing a little bit. The DA is really suffering everywhere, and the Freedom Front Plus is growing. So they're picking up what the DA is losing to a large extent. So it will be very interesting to see that. The other interesting thing is just going to see if there is a movement of independence and to what extent that can play in on the results. I think leading up to the local government election, what is going to be very significant is that in particularly parties like the EFF, who didn't really particularly want to have local government elections this year, because of course they like to have big stadiums, that's their way of canvassing big meetings, and they haven't been able to do that with COVID, that they will of course jump on every single little thing that they can to make a big deal of that. And so I think racial things will deteriorate a little bit. They always do before a local government election. Things get a little bit, any election. So things get a little bit more fragmented. The temperatures rise, and etc. And of course, things get a little bit more vicious from the opposition side, who wants to get themselves into the media attention. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a noisy few months as we head towards local government election. It's already noisy, and it's going to get super noisy.
Thank you very much, Melanie Verwoerd, for your time. I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Keep